the measure is actually pretty simple, is that the reservoir is essentially releasing a certain amount of elk per second in its buffer, right? And there is a maximum size for this particular buffer. And the only way that you can essentially empty this buffer is through the ElkNet, right? So the measure is essentially there's only one way out, and even if you had, you know, attacks on that particular way out, there is only so much that can go out, right? At once. And so this is why we're offering, we're actually asking the community to vote on this new, insurance fund, right? For in case something goes wrong, right? Which of course is not super likely to happen, but we do what we can, right? So the point of that is if somehow something were to go wrong, at worst there is a limit of a certain number of elk that can actually be released at any point in time. And if that were to happen, we would actually use this insurance fund to compensate, right? But I just want to reassure you, it's very unlikely at this point that it would happen. I can't tell you, 100% for sure that it couldn't happen, but it's really, really unlikely. And as I've said, we've got multiple layers of protection to first block the risk, and then if we're not able to block the risk, at least the reservoir itself enforces that the loss is significantly limited, right? So you're very unlikely to see a situation like a wormhole where essentially, the whole reservoir would get drained.
Awesome.
Hey, can I ask you guys a question?
Sure.
So I just tried to use your elk swap to get some Chronos, and
Okay.
and my transaction said it went through, but it's not showing that I have any elk. It's weird. Like it shows like the TX went through, like the transaction, but it still says I have 0.
So yeah, I mean, like, first of all, so we're having major problems with Chronos at the moment. The problems are not really with respect to safety, although there are some implications for the safety of the chain, not necessarily for the safety of the ElkNet. But the major problem that we are having at the moment is that we're not able to achieve a very high throughput out of Chronos or into Chronos, because essentially we're getting rate limited, right? And this seems to be something which has really started happening like in the past week or 2 weeks, right? Where we're really seeing that essentially the maximum amount of transfers that we can actually sustain is roughly between 4 and 8 per hour, right? And this is actually not a limitation of the ElkNet, obviously. And you can transfer between any other pair of chains, and you will see that it goes much faster than that. But this is actually a limitation of Chronos. And like, to answer your specific question, I mean, I guess what I would ask is, did you actually transfer out of Chronos or into Chronos, and from what chain?
I'm currently talking to you on my phone, and I have it pulled up, your elk finance swap, the app on my laptop, and I tried to convert my BUSD to elk, and that's when it said my transaction went through, but I never received any elk. And then I sent $1 through of BUSD to see if it would work, and it did go through. And then I actually sent another payment and actually got some crow from it, but the first one that I had, it never went through.
And it seems like you're not actually using the swap, right? It seems like you're not actually using the cross-chain transfer. You're just using the swap, right?
Yes. I
Okay,
see
I mean,
the ElkNet because I had to use like where you click on ElkNet on your website. Like I click on the swap, and then when I wanted to switch the Elk from Elk to Chronos, then I went to the Elk swap or the ElkNet like little swap thing, and then I could switch it over. But the first transaction that I originally sent through never went through, or it said it went through, but I still don't have any Elk from it.
okay, what I would suggest is, so we've got moderators on the chat. Uh, can you give them the information, as in the transaction hashes, and they can have a look
Yeah,
um,
I'll send it
to
to them.
understand what happened, and then if there's anything, you can also DM me later on.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Can I ask about the insurance fund idea, please?
Yeah, of course.
Where would that be funded from? Would the rewards be reduced to sort of direct into a new pot for the fund?
Right. So the white paper initially set aside 20 million elk for the community funds, right? And the way that we're planning to initially fund it, which doesn't mean that this is the only way that we can fund it. I mean, actually, we have plans to fund it also as part of the transaction fees that we would get from elk, right? And all of that. But essentially, the initial um, idea, and this is actually what we're asking our community to vote on as we upgrade the token tomorrow, right? We're asking the community to vote on basically taking half of that community, reserve, and setting it aside for that specifically. So for an insurance fund, right? Now the community can vote yes or no, obviously, right? And I'm not there to tell you that you should vote one way or the other. I mean, I personally, I mean, we suggested this because we feel it's a like it's the responsible thing to do, and it doesn't mean, because we allocate these funds initially as insurance, which basically correspond to, like, you can think almost of a quarter of the total elk that can ever be ever in circulation, right? uh, on any chain, right? um, it's not because we initially assigned 10 million that we plan to keep
Hey, can I ask a question? So, I think I've kept up with the most recent information. So forgive me if I missed, reading something. But could you maybe just talk high level about sort of the state of bridging in general? I know that one of the I think mediums was saying that most existing bridges are using either sort of a lock and release or burn and mint system, and that ElkNet is somehow different. I know there's the reservoir, and that it seems like maybe that's a little bit like a lock and release. But I guess, can you explain how that's different,
yeah.
and then sort of how the security works, and why the security of elk is superior, etc.
Right. I mean, so I think what you want to understand, and then this is actually going to become clearer once we publish the teasers for the SDK, which will include the interface for the reservoir. Right. The reservoir is a generic mechanism which, in principle, lets you implement lock and release as well as burn and mint. Right. Um, so you want to distinguish the mechanism, right, from its actual use, right? So people that are going to be building, let's say, their own proxy tokens or their own tokens and are going to use Elk and ElkNet as a bridge, right, will be able to implement it however they choose, right? So either they'll mint and burn, or they'll lock and release, or they can do anything else as well, right? I mean, it's not actually limited to one or the other, right? When it comes to Elk, so the token itself, right? And this will already be different for CHFT, which is our stable coin, right? But when it comes to the Elk token itself, the mechanism is closer to lock and release, right? Because essentially each reservoir holds the entire possible circulating supply on every chain, right? And the ElkNet essentially ensures that there is never more than the maximum, of 42 million across all the chains, right? So that's like for the mechanism and how we're using it for Elk, right? In terms of security, there are lots of different things that you want to consider as part of essentially how secure a particular bridge is, right? Now, this particular update does not add decentralization, right? Decentralization doesn't necessarily mean that something is more secure, by the way. But this is coming soon, right? Essentially, it's a stepping stone toward decentralization. In terms of security, I think we sort of, we described that reasonably well in some of our articles, and I also have a tweet about like how we do things. So essentially, the biggest risk for a bridge, other than essentially being hacked because the code, or like there's either an insider job or there's a problem with the code, right? And this is essentially what happened with probably every bridge hack so far, right? Now, the security depends on many things, right? But there's essentially two components, right? As in, there's basically the off-chain part, right? And this is the ElkNet, and this is the part that we are sort of consolidating in this particular update. But we'll keep getting consolidated, in the future, right? So that's definitely not a, something which doesn't evolve, right? It's something that's going to evolve over time. And then there is the Unchained Component, right? And the Unchained Component is essentially a set of contracts which perform this lock release or burn and mint or whatever, right? And this is also something that we're updating in this particular update, not necessarily with the purpose of adding extra security, although with the reservoir mechanism, we're actually increasing security and transparency. But mainly with the goal of this update is actually to reduce the gas costs, right, for our users and for our ElkNet, right? And as it stands, we're basically reducing the gas costs by something like 2.5 times the current costs, right? Which makes us, I would say, not the cheapest bridge you could imagine, right? But definitely makes us much more competitive, and allows us also to scale better, because obviously cost is a very limiting factor, right? So I guess just in terms of security, really, what I would say is there's, to sum up, right, there's basically different components that can be attacked, right? Or there's different components that are at risk, right? The final, I would say, step, and this would not actually even be a final step, right? But essentially the final step in securing the ElkNet for us is actually decentralization, and that's coming probably in a month or two, right? Or at least starting to be tested in a month or two, right? The security itself is actually, I would say, I mean, without bragging, I would say it's kind of state of the art, right? I mean, obviously it's not perfect because, nothing really is, right? I mean, and you've kind of seen that lots of different projects got attacked, right? And essentially lost a lot of money. We have so far avoided that, right? And as we move forward, we're really adding layers and layers of security onto the system, and this has actually been pretty powerful in terms of avoiding some of the problems that we have seen, both with other projects, right, and specifically the problems that we have also seen with the chains that we support, right, because we support a lot of chains, and we kind of need to make sure that we cover all our bases, because essentially we can be attacked from any chain, right? And what we've seen recently actually is that, to give you an example, for example, Kronos seems to have a significant vulnerability. So it doesn't affect the chain itself, but it definitely affects any bridge that tries to use Kronos, right? And because of our safeguards, we were essentially able to catch it and avoid it, right? Now, I wouldn't give you details on that just yet, because we're talking with the Kronos team about that, but we will definitely at some point provide a blog post to explain exactly what the problem was and why we were able to essentially not suffer from it, right? But what I would say really is overall, I think you want to remember that this is a very early space, right? I think what's really important is that we're being careful, but we can't give 100% guarantees that things are going to go wrong, right? And this is what insurance fund would help us with, because it means that we can compensate any kind of problem that would happen. The other thing that I would say with respect to previous hacks, right, is that we've actually seen that there were significant vulnerabilities in bridges that were essentially minting a token like Ethereum, for example, on a different chain. And the problem there is essentially that because you're kind of locking the token in one place and you're minting it on the other chain, right? There's a significant risk that if someone can somehow steal what is locked, right, on the original chain, they would essentially make the token which has been minted on the target chain completely worthless, right? This is actually what happened with Wormhole, and this is a very significant risk, right, that ElkNet is not free of, right, but is definitely much better equipped to deal with because of all the measures that I described, and because of the fact that essentially we're not, at least with the Elk token, right, we're not essentially creating another token on another chain, right, which corresponds to Elk, right? The Elk token is on all chains, and that actually provides some interesting properties, including potentially more security with respect to this particular type of attack, right? Yeah, I guess that was a long answer, but I hope that I kind of covered a little bit the different risks, and that sort of answers yours and maybe other questions as well.
Hi, I just want to ask as well about the after the tokens are upgraded, and because we have to break our liquidity pools, upgrade the tokens. But when will new farms be available with the new tokens, and will those farms be exactly the same as the ones that are there at the moment?
So are the farms, so will the farms be available is the question. And when will the farms be available with the new token, right?
Yes, and will they just be in place of the existing ones, or will there be any changes there?
Yeah, so we're going to have some overlap between the old farms and the new farms, right? And the point of that is essentially to guarantee essentially that you're not losing, right? Um, sorry, are you saying something or?
Oh, no, I was listening. I'll just.
Okay, yeah. So the point of this overlap, and it's actually a short overlap, right? But it should be sufficient. I think it's like 3 days roughly, right? The point of that overlap is just that you don't have to like rush to upgrade, right? Um, and the second point of that overlap is essentially that what we're going to do first, right? I guess what's going to happen tomorrow, right? And essentially over the weekend, right? Is that we'll first activate, the upgrade for the new token, right? As well as the ElkNet, as in the new ElkNet, right? The V2, right? And then we'll actually deploy the farms, right? And there may be, a few hours difference between the time we activate the upgrade and the time that we deploy the farms, right? Just because, we're supporting 16 chains, like we can't, deploy this like like instantly, right? But it's not going to be, you know, um, too much, right? So I guess what you want to keep in mind is that if you stay in your current farm, let's say for a day, right, like just to play it safe, right, you can, right? I mean, if you want the new token right away, you can do that, right? No problem, right? You'll just probably have to wait maybe a couple hours to create to basically join the new farms, right? Um, but
Okay, so both farms that with the old and the new tokens will be, available. Sort of,
yeah, they'll both be active for like an overlapping period of at least 3 days, right? So like you kind of want to make sure that you upgrade within these 3 days to not essentially lose out, right? Because at some point the old farms would not reward anymore, and you'd just be sitting there without nothing, right?
yeah.
Um, but you don't want to do that.
I'm sorry.
You can actually, but like, there's no point to like, it's not a rush, like it's not a race, right? Like, if you upgrade, let's say tomorrow Saturday, or you upgrade on Sunday, or even you upgrade on Monday, as long as you kind of upgrade before the old farms are out, you're fine, right? And you don't have to worry about that. Now, I would actually just provide one caveat to that is, and this is something we can't really avoid, right? There might be diverging prices, right? For a short while, as essentially people upgrade, maybe someone, places a massive market buy and like whoosh, the price goes crazy, or like this sell and the price goes down on one chain because there will be less liquidity. Like it's basically a transition period during which you can expect to see less liquidity on ElkNet because people are going to be upgrading, right? So like the safest thing from a trading perspective, right, is either you buy now, if you want to buy, right, or if you want to sell, either you buy now or you sell now, or you try to do that after the farms are live again, or let's say a Monday evening or Tuesday, right? And after the farms will be live on Saturday, right? But essentially after the old farms are gone and like you only have the new farms which are live, at which point most of the liquidity will have migrated, right? And this is the point at which you want to trade to play it safe, right? Now, I'm not saying there's not an opportunity to sort of make money in the meantime, right? I mean, feel free, right? But it's kind of at your own risk. So you just want to be aware of that. And I think the safest thing to remember is like you've got one elk of the old or the current elk token, right? It's always going to be equal to one elk of the new elk token at any point in time, even after these 3 days, like basically even in a year, right? You'll be able to upgrade that elk, right? So like, it doesn't make sense to like leave it for too long, right? But it's not like you're in a massive rush to, upgrade, right? So you can play it safe, or you can play it more aggressive, and try to make money or whatever. Like, that's kind of up to you, right? Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. And have you got an idea of when it will go live tomorrow, the farms and the upgrade?
Yeah. So the ElkNet will go live tomorrow, I would say afternoon UTC, right? And the farms probably evening UTC, right? Or anywhere like within a few hours, right?
Yeah, thank you.
And
Can
yeah,
I
I
ask
mean
something?
yeah, go ahead.
Baal, in your opinion, which are the projects in the crypto spaces that right now are the main competitors of Elk? And in your opinion, what are the strengths of Elk compared to the main projects?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a great question. I mean, there's lots of projects that are doing cross chain, right? There's definitely a lot of them that are probably doing cross chain and essentially trying to sort of like surf the wave, right? But they don't really have any real tech behind it, right? It's just it's just like a project that's sort of saying, yeah, we're cross chain, and like either they never launch or they launch something which is based on something that already exists, or worse, they launch something which is completely broken, right? I'm not going to give you names of that, but there are a few for sure, right? Then I think there's definitely a few, right? I mean, I would say, for example, multi-chain is one, right? Is it a competitor? Not necessarily based on our global vision. I mean, currently it is, right? But based on our full vision, maybe it's not, right? There is Router Protocol, which is more infrastructure, right? And stuff that's built on Router, which potentially is again could be considered a competitor to Elk, right? I would say the difference there is probably Router has a potentially a more I want to say a more complicated way of approaching the problem, right? But I can't really claim that our solution is that simple yet, right? Because essentially we have not even released our SDK, right? So we can't really I don't want to make claims which people might later disagree with, right? But essentially there's that. Then I would say, and this might surprise you, but actually it is it's a fair assessment. It actually probably one of our biggest competitors is actually Chainlink. And it's not necessarily because I'm saying they're a competitor that there is no potential for collaboration, right? Or even partnerships, or anything done together, right? But essentially, Oracle projects, right? I mean, Chainlink being, of course, the main one, can support like most of the stuff that we're planning to support without, right? And so I wouldn't, I wouldn't say again, one of these that I mentioned is the main competitor, right? I think we sort of have a unique approach in the cross chain space, really, which you could argue is not that unique. I would say it still has some interesting properties on its own, right? But definitely we're not the only ones doing that, and I think what we're going to be seeing in the, let's say, in the coming year or the coming couple of years, is probably an explosion of projects that are trying to do cross chain, and a massive actually consolidation around the few projects which are serious about it, right? And which sort of have potentially some lead time in implementing and like supporting cross chain. And I mean, I can't make promises, but I'd like to think that Elk is one of those, right? Yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Many thanks.
I think one of the other cool things about Elk is we avoid the exit liquidity problem because we use arbitrage to incentivize the market to stabilize the price on multiple chains. So you don't run into a situation where there's no funds on a single chain to transfer to when that chain gets hot, because investors are constantly incentivized, and of course bots and stuff, to make that profit and buy ELK when it's low on one chain and sell it when it's high on the other to equalize the prices. So it's another pretty cool thing. Also thought I would get to some of these written questions here that I posted in the chat again here. The first one being, what is ELK Labs? Why does it need that much funding? And how would it benefit my investment in ELK? So this one's pretty easy to answer, and will come up, of course, in the governance vote as well. But basically, we want that 5 million ELK in the ELK treasury in order to move towards incorporation. Now, we actually intend to spend very little of that ELK, but instead use it as a valuation so that investors can, venture capitalist investors can invest in ELK Labs, the company, versus doing an OTC token trade and exposing you guys as well as them to risk if there was a massive sell-off or something like that. So it's a more standard investment for them, and also allows us to use ELK Labs to continue building on ELK as a real company and incorporate and have names on paper and really kind of protect everyone. So we hope that this will have a very positive impact on what we're doing. And of course, we can't comment on price action, but we're doing this because we believe it's best for ELK, and that's why we've suggested it in the vote, and kind of mitigating risk for everyone. And of course, there's no guarantees, but again, we think this is kind of the best way to go about it.
Yeah, I mean, I would actually add to that one thing, right? It is essentially take the perspective of a developer that wants to join ELK, right? And here we're talking about like top developers, right? Like, for example, developers that have experience in like distributed systems and like building things like ElkNet, peer-to-peer networks and things like that, which we need actually to turn the ElkNet into what we want it to be, right? In order essentially to hire these people, right? And keep in mind at the moment that this is very much a developer's market, right? And I'm not just talking about the blockchain market. Literally, these people are getting offers like for 400, 500, 600K a year with Google, with Meta, with Microsoft, with Apple, with Facebook. Sorry, I already said Facebook, Meta, right? Twitter, and so on, right? And what they're after often is actually job security, right? And this is something which is very difficult to offer as an early project without a company, right? And without essentially any other backing than its own community funds, right? I mean, not to say the community funds are not significant, they are, right? But these people might be more risk averse, right? Or might be essentially more interested in comparing their risk with what the market offers, right? And I've actually found it really difficult, and we've tried actually. We find it really difficult to attract this top talent, right? As developers for ELK, with just a guarantee of essentially you'll be part of the you'll be part of the ELK team, you'll be part of the projects, you'll get some ELK for that and all of that, right? Because there's just a lot of risk, right? And while the ElkNet, while the ELK Labs approach is one attempt at dealing with that, is definitely not the only one, right? And if you guys have reservations about doing that, feel free to vote against, right? Really, I mean, I'm not trying to influence you in any way in terms of the votes that you are making, right? The benefits, I think the pro for voting for this ELK Labs fund and for creating ELK Labs is very clearly the ability to attract talent, right? Great talent for the continued development of the project, right? Because we just need more developers, right? And the ability to sort of have a company behind ELK that would essentially be sufficiently well funded that it can essentially operate for 5 to 10 years, and support the project, right? Both in terms of development, in terms of marketing, in terms of lots of different things, right? So those would be the really the core advantages, right? And we've kind of set this up so that the company is not gonna take these 5 million elks, right, and dump them on the market, because first of all, it's not getting 5 million elks right away. It's essentially getting 5 million elks over time, like at a very small vesting scale, so a very small amount that's getting vested over time, right? And of course, it's not in our interest, for that company to essentially use this elk for any other purpose than really benefiting elk, because it's sort of like the elk company, right? I mean, you can think of it as like Avalanche, right, and Ava Labs, right? It's sort of the same thing or a very similar thing that we have in mind with that, right? Maybe the main reason to vote against really is you feel like elk should just be a DAO and shouldn't have any company behind it, should just have developers, with the consequences that this could have, right? I mean, potentially partners that do not want to partner with elk because there is no company behind it, right? Investors that may not want to invest, or that may be after buying some elk token from the community, and in that case, if a governance vote essentially agrees to do an OTC of like 1 million elk in exchange for like some amount of dollars or whatever, right? The consequence of that is that the investor has no one to restrain them, right? Because they have the elk, right? So like if at some point they say, well, screw this, I'm out, they'll sell everything, and then there's no one to block it, right? Whereas if it's within a company, the company makes the decision, right? And as long as the company doesn't have all the elk up front, it has the ability to really limit the downside on this particular aspect. But again, like, this is a decision, really, like, this is a proposal for the community, and we're really expecting the community to tell us what they think, right? And this is up to you guys, right, to vote and say, I support this or I don't, and whatever happens, we'll sort of, we have no plans of abandoning the project, right? It's just, in one case, it may be somewhat limiting for the future development, right? So I hope that answers the question.
Hi, I wanted to ask, as far as this new governance, how does it start? You've done the moose sales, you've raised money, you've done this, you've done that, and now all of a sudden we've got a DAO going with these votes. Is there a treasury? Is that all considered past? Are new moose sales going to be considered part of the DAO? How does this kind of break up from here?
Yeah, so I mean, like, first of all, this particular vote, right, does not establish a DAO, right? I mean, at least not formally, right? This is really just about voting on three things, which are essentially, what do we do with the insurance fund? Do you agree that we should basically set aside this money for ELK Labs, which is not a DAO? It's actually a real life, or it will be a real life company, and then do you agree to start the vesting clock for the developers, right? So those are essentially the 3 votes that we're collecting at this point, right? Now, in terms of a DAO, right? Those are the funds which anyway are already in the community wallet now, which are anyway set aside for the community wallet, right? And those funds will form a DAO under governance, which we are actually gonna set up on Avalanche chain, right? And at that point, of course, the funds that result, all the funds which are currently providing liquidity in ElkDex, right, will be under the purview of that DAO, and they're basically part of the community funds, right? Which include actually the moose that were actually sold and used to sort of provide bootstrapping liquidity on all the chains that we support, right? And in addition, future moose sales will also contribute to those funds, right? And future moose sales will have nothing to do with Elk Labs, right? Because Elk Labs is a developer; it doesn't own any moose, right? And future, I would say, activities potentially, Elk deciding to, let's say, acquire a protocol. Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm not gonna give names, right? But like, let's say acquire like a cross-chain protocol, or like invest in some other project, or even not, just essentially just keep the funds and maybe do something with them, like, I don't know, convert some of them to USDT, start farming, whatever, right? All of that will be essentially subject to governance votes, right? And at that point, anyone can, at the point that we actually launch this governance module, which is also planned for this quarter, right? At the point that we launch this, anyone can make proposals, right? And it would work very much like any other DAO, right? And it would have the Elk funds, which are the community LPs, right? Which are already right now in ElkDex. The funds that are set aside for the community. It would also control the insurance fund if it's created. If not, then it would just control those funds anyway, right? And it would also control the funds that result from the moose sales. I hope that sort of answers the question. Okay. Yeah, I don't know if it's like if you had a specific question in mind, feel free to ask for a follow-up. But yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Okay. Well, oh, go ahead.
I just had a question about the hardening and when that's due to be happening. I thought it was meant to happen already, but I guess not. I guess maybe it coincides with these changes.
Sorry, what's the question?
When is the expected halvening of the emissions of the ELK token going to take place?
Oh, Snake, do you have the date exactly?
Yeah, I think it's April 24th.
Yeah. So essentially, yeah, I mean, like, essentially, it's still happening. We just sort of felt like it made sense to push that until after we had done this upgrade and deployed the new ElkNet, right? To sort of not have everything coming at once. Like, it's already a lot of things coming at once tomorrow and over the weekend, right? So we just didn't want to have too much. But it is happening like in 2 weeks, right? Basically. So just small delay.
I'm not sure if you guys have said much yet about the specifics of CHFT, and maybe it's premature, but is that, in terms of like the broad plan, is it going to be an algorithmic stable coin? Will you burn elk to mint CHFT? Are you guys going to set up almost like a lending protocol?
Yeah, so essentially CHFT will be like the main, I want to say, like the main feature is that it's going to be cross-chain, right? The way that we intend for it to work is not to be algorithmic. We intend to have it collateralized, right, and not just by elk token, because I think we kind of see what is happening with Terra, right, and then UST, right. And I feel like single collateralization is very risky, right? So we'll actually have multi-collateral, and initially the plan is for that to be basically collateralized with the elk token and stable coins, right? Other stable coins, like for example, US dollar stable coins, right? And the idea is that you'll be able to mint this on any chain. I mean, at term, right? Like once the whole thing is fully launched, you'll be able to essentially mint this on any chain. You'll be able to also redeem, as in basically burn it, right? For the underlying collateral on any chain as well, right? And you'll be able to essentially move value across the chain, across the various chains that we support that way. So like the emphasis, like for me, the emphasis really is on the cross chain, right? There are some interesting properties to have like a stable coin which is backed by stables and by the elk token and potentially other non-stable tokens ultimately, right? But let's say the key idea really is to let people move value across chains without having to rely on the elk token, right? Which I think adds a lot of interesting capabilities, in terms of lending, in terms of cross-chain loans, in terms of just being able to move like significant amounts of stable value across chains without necessarily having to suffer from a price impact that is too important. And yeah, like that's basically the idea. I hope that more or less answers the question.
And yeah, a lot of I think ElkNet v2 really paves the way for those innovations going forward. So it's kind of like all those things coming up on a roadmap, that kind of ElkNet opens the gates for. And I think, I think it's going to be pretty exciting going forward. So we kind of answered one of them here, so I'll skip. I guess like what would be the first significant upgrade to the Elk ecosystem? That would, I believe, be proxy tokens or CHFT. Which?
So what do you mean by upgrade, essentially?
What would be the next thing on our roadmap after V2?
So proxy tokens.
Proxy tokens first.
Proxy tokens, yeah. But I mean, CHFT is itself going to be a proxy token, right? So that's definitely the next step. It is letting anyone essentially leverage the ElkNet to bridge their own tokens across chains, right?
And what would be really cool is CHFT using that in a format to arbitrage proxy tokens and other assets on multiple chains. Pretty exciting, I think. Next question is, any thought on an Elk subnet? Yes, we totally have talked about it. I spoke to some folks from Ava Labs about it. Nothing formal yet, but we definitely would be interested to maybe do something like that if given the opportunity. So we'll figure that out going forward. Another one here. Will CHFT use ElkNet v2 mechanics? I believe so, right? It would be compatible with this current version of ElkNet. I
mean, absolutely, right? So definitely the like the current ElkNet, like besides the improvements to the gas, right, and besides safety and transparency improvements, right, the current ElkNet, like the main goal of the current ElkNet really is to support proxy tokens using Moose NFTs, right? And CHFT will do the same. It'll actually leverage that to, go cross chain, right?
Perfect. All right. So the next question here is: can Elk survive without Baal? Well, one of the first things I'll say, I'll let Baal take the rest of it. But what we're building here is aiming to be fully decentralized, right? So we actually don't want to have that that kind of prerequisite of control, and where it is this superior tech that's kind of owned mostly by the community. So the idea is that we wouldn't be meddling, but I'll hand over the rest here to Baal.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, there's, I mean, let me actually answer it slightly differently than the question maybe intends, right? The goal for, I mean, someone like me, but I guess people in like, maybe not every founder in DeFi, I don't know, but like definitely the goal for many of us, and inspired basically by Satoshi, is that ultimately the project reaches a point where this initial architect, right, or like this like initial creator is no longer required, right? And this is what Satoshi did, right? I mean, this is I mean, was it a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. Just to answer the question preemptively about Bitcoin and what happened there, right? But definitely, the goal is for Elk to eventually be, as Snake said, completely decentralized, right? So that even Elk Labs or even the Elk team would not be necessary to essentially, I would say two things. First, the survival of the project, and second, the development of the project, right? And clearly, we're not there yet, obviously, but we are slowly getting there, right? Now, is that is that gonna take another 3 months, another 6 months, another year? I would like to say roughly, I think 6 months to a year, probably, right? Till the point where our input is no longer, or at least my input is no longer needed to push the project forward, right? But that doesn't mean that I would leave, right? Obviously, I mean, if people want me out, it's fine, right? But that doesn't mean I would leave, right? Now, in terms of ElkNet and Elk being able to survive without me, like just the survival part, right? I mean, not the development part. So the development part is like 6 months to 1 year, probably, right? The survival, I think, is we're probably at less than 3 months at this point. In other words, we have made the right hires already. We just want to make a few more. Essentially, we want to get more distributed systems people to help build and maintain the ElkNet, right? Because this is essentially the only part at this point that I am really needed for, because I have the experience and the knowledge to build it, right? But as we get those hires into place, then I'm not actually needed anymore, at least for the survival of the project, right? Now, if something happens tomorrow, and I don't know, whatever, like, I disappear. Not gonna happen, I reassure you. But like, if something happens tomorrow, ElkNet will continue to operate fine. I mean, maybe not tomorrow because we're doing the upgrade, right? But like, let's say on Monday after everything is fine, right? ElkNet will continue to operate fine for a long time, right? But it may be difficult to support additional things, such as supporting the proxy tokens properly, such as adding Chft, decentralizing the ElkNet, and all of that, right? But again, I just want to reassure you, I have no plans to leave anytime soon. So yeah, I hope that answers the question, I guess. Yeah. Interesting question.
Yeah, it's a good question. So another one here, be interesting to hear something about the nodes that people could run in the future. I've said, I mean, a few different times around the nodes. As far as we know, we need something, like a bit more powerful than a Raspberry Pi 4, something like a mid-tier regular desktop should be able to run meet the hardware requirements to run the node. It'll be a certain amount of ELK that needs to be staked in a pool in order to whitelist your address for being a validator for ElkNet and operating a node. And so that amount hasn't been released yet, but it'll start at least quite high and kind of come down from there as we get more decentralized and completely work off proof of stake. So hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, I mean, so yeah, again, more details to be released, right? You're not gonna need a massive server to run this. I would sort of recommend not running an ElkNet node on a Raspberry Pi, even though I'm sure it works fine, actually, because it doesn't require significant resources. Like basically the main resource that it needs is just having a stable network connection, right? And having stable RPCs to work with. But yeah, like we're actually, I mean, this is still early, right? But we were in talks with a project that can make it very easy for you to run your own ElkNet. Like just basically deploy it as like clicking like a bunch of options. I want to support these chains. I want to do this, that. This is the transaction in which I actually staked my ELK. For gaining the right to actually run this node, and then you basically off you go, right? So you can even run this on your own PC. I would emphasize that we'd like to have maximum uptime for these nodes. So ideally, again, it's not a good idea to run this on like your laptop, and then you're like put your laptop to sleep. You walk around, you go home, and then you turn it back on, right? But definitely, it doesn't require significant resources, and it doesn't require. I mean, okay, initially maybe, but like very very quickly, it won't require. I want to say like significant skills in terms of systems administrators and like just learning how to like run and configure programs from the command line, right? The goal is to make it easy because again, it's in everybody's interest if people can actually run an ElkNet node without having to become I don't know systems engineers or massive geeks, right? So yeah, we can't say too much about it yet, but definitely this is the goal.
Awesome. And the last question here on the list here is, how do you plan to build a venture capitalist funding, VC funding in Elk Labs? I think we mentioned with our approach to incorporating Elk and looking at getting VC investment in a more traditional sense in Elk Labs, the corporation, will be kind of much more attractive. I don't want to name any names or give anything away, but we were at the Avalanche Summit a couple weeks ago, and we had a lot of different conversations with a lot of different VCs, and the reception was all positive for this looking like it could be done. Of course, no deals have been made, but it just seemed like that shouldn't be too big of a problem. Elk seemed pretty interesting to everyone we spoke to.
Yeah, so I mean, again, I'm not sure what is the intent of the question specifically, but the key idea is essentially that we'd like to raise money for this company to develop Elk, right? Which doesn't mean that we can't raise money for Elk itself, right? And that's also a possibility, actually. The difference being that in the second case, Elk, the Elk DAO, right, would have the deal would essentially be between the VC and the Elk DAO, right? And often the only way that this can be done is through OTC, right? Because that's kind of that's kind of all the DAO can really offer the VC, right, in exchange for funds, right? So yeah, I'm just looking now on the chat. There's a question what are we developing if we want to make it self-governing? Not sure I understand the question. Could you maybe elaborate on that? So we are definitely Elk itself and the Elk DAO should be community governed, right? The point of Elk Labs is, again, just think of Avalanche, right, which is the chain, right, and Ava Labs, which is the team, right? Essentially, that's kind of building Avalanche, right? So the team that's going to be working on Elk Labs is the Elk team, or at least the part of the Elk teams which are developers, right? And then maybe the marketing and others as well, right? It's essentially it's essentially a company to make it easier to interface with the real world, right? Which doesn't mean we don't interface with other blockchain projects and we don't have a DAO and we don't have all of that, right? This is simply a way to make it easier for us. Just reading the questions here.
Quick question. For the 3-day overlap between the old farms and new farms, are they both going to have the same emission rates, or are you guys going to trickle down?
They'll both have the same emission rates. One of them will end, the other one will continue until the halving, at which point its emission rates will be reduced, right?
Right, but within that window, the overlap window, they would be the same emission rates.
Yes, and that means basically three days within which you can try to optimize your return on investment, right?
Right.
And then I'm not gonna tell you what to do. This is really your call, right? Everybody can decide. Yeah, I mean, there's just keep in mind, one thing is obviously once you upgrade, upgrade is one way, right? So it's not like you can really go back, right? At least not easily, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And being on Crow and seeing how Crow has a lot of issues right now with Elk, would that prevent us from being able to transfer break apart your LP pool or LP token and transfer the old Elk for the new Elk within that allotted window?
Um, I would say no. So basically, like, let me just again maybe give you a little bit more detail on Chronos. Essentially, there are two problems, right? The first problem, and this is unrelated to the ElkNet, and it's just something that we were able to catch because our ElkNet has lots of let's say safety mechanisms in it, right? So this is a problem where essentially Chronos doesn't actually have a concept of a block, right? I mean, it has a concept of a block, but essentially what we're hearing from the Chronos team is that transactions which cannot get included into a block will actually still be executed as part of a block, the same block, right? But they will not be visible. And this is actually a potentially a big problem. Like it's not a safety problem, right? But it essentially means that you can make a transaction on Chronos and have that transaction be completely invisible from the blockchain explorer, and from basically anyone that uh, doesn't know how to mess with Tendermint, which is the underlying layer that provides consensus, right? So that's actually a big problem for Chronos. Nothing to do with Elk, nothing to do with the slowdowns that we have at the moment. Just something to keep in mind. And they've said that this is actually going to get fixed in the next release, right? So that is one problem, which means that sometimes you might actually make transactions which you cannot find on the Explorer. I think as a user, that's what it means fundamentally. What it also means is if you're using a bridge which doesn't have the proper safety mechanisms in place, you could be royally screwed. As in, things could go really wrong, right? But I just want to set that aside now. So like that's one problem. This will be fixed. Has nothing to do with us, and we don't have a problem with it, right? I mean, we are able to work around this limitation. The limitation we cannot work around, and this we are still talking with Chronos to figure out exactly why that happens and where that comes from, is that we are not able to send transactions as part of the ElkNet, but like it like any wallet actually is not able to send transactions at a fast rate on Chronos, right? Irrespective of how much gas you pay, irrespective of the gas limit, irrespective of the type of transaction, right? In other words, think of it this way, right? Let's say within 5 minutes, you can post, let's say, just an arbitrary number. You can post, let's say, 10 transactions, right? That's it, no more, right? And any transaction that you try to post extra, you can't, right? That's just that doesn't go through, right? And this is actually the problem which is causing the mess for Chronos, right? At the moment, at least for ElkNet and Chronos at the moment, is because we are actually posting the transactions as we should, like in a timely fashion, after like as it works on every other chain, like like it works well there, right? I mean, I guess you can confirm that for yourself, right? The problem is the chain doesn't actually accept these transactions because again of this rate limit, which is artificially imposed by something in Chronos that we haven't actually been able to figure out exactly what that is, right? And because of that, it means that essentially if we get more transactions coming into Chronos or coming out of Chronos within this period of time, that we need to sort of accept, right, and process, then there is no way for us to actually push them through, right? And this is actually why it piles up, right? So like the simplest analogy is you've got a bridge and you've got a guy at the end of the bridge, which is only letting 5 cars through every 5 minutes or something like that, like 1 car per minute, right? What that means essentially is, if you've got 10 cars that arrive and then like within 5 minutes, then after a while you've got a lot of cars that are piling up to cross that bridge, but they still can't cross. Like only a few can cross at a time, right? This is exactly what's happening now, right? Now this affects ElkNet, but what it doesn't, or what it shouldn't affect, is you as a user, unless you're trying to post many transactions at the same time, right? Unfortunately, because the ElkNet works this way, we don't have a choice. We have to post these transactions because that's sort of like the whole point of it, right? We're getting something on one chain and we're actually making a corresponding transaction on the other chain, right? But if you are yourself sending a transaction on Chronos, yeah, the RPC is a bit brittle and there's going to be like a few problems here and there, which are going to be kind of annoying, right? Like it's going to fail arbitrarily, things are not going to work here and there. That's because the chain is overloaded, right? But these problems should not actually impact your ability to upgrade the ELK token, should not impact your ability to trade, and should not impact your ability to use ELK farms and anything else in ELK, right? And I just want to make it clear again, if you've got a bridge and you're just stuck at the bridge, like in the real world, nothing happens to you, right? I mean, it's not like you fall off the bridge. It's just you're stuck, right? So this is essentially what's happening to the funds, right? They're stuck, but they're not, in any kind of danger other than just, being massively delayed, right? So I hope that makes sense. Again, like I want to say, don't worry too much about it. The main worry is if at this point you want to get out of Chronos or into Chronos, and that's sort of your choice, right? Really, just be prepared for delays, right? It's like, it's basically rush hour at every point in time of every day at this point on Chronos, and yeah, like basically getting out or getting in is very difficult, right? But everyone will be able to get out eventually. It's gonna take some time.
And a final question I had is, does the team have any game plan or ideas on how they're gonna basically grow their marketing so that we can have new users, a growing rate of new users, which would then lead to a growing rate of new TVL locked into the existing chains or any of the new chains? Because it kind of seems like we, as Elk, it kind of stagnated in the past few months, whereas other projects, very successful marketing, and within a few days they've been able to lock a few $1 billion in TVL, specifically Stargate. So I'm just want to know if Elk has any near-term marketing strategies to really send the outreach out and to increase the user base and increase its TVL on the chains.
Yeah, so I mean, we've got a few. I would say we've got a few things that are coming up, which I think are going to help. They're not necessarily marketing related, right? But definitely marketing is a part of that, right? So these things are going to help. Another thing which is going to help is actually the proxy tokens, because essentially proxy tokens will bring a lot more visibility and a lot more essentially interest in the ELK token, because this is how you pay for your proxy to be actually transmitted. Now, in terms of a marketing effort, so we have actually had a significant drive in the past, I think, month or so, in terms of like planning our strategy going forward, and in terms of identifying what are the key places and what are the key influencers and key outlets, right, through which we are actually trying to get out of, right, and sort of like boost our boost our marketing effort, right? Is it gonna have an impact in the short term? I think it depends how you define short term, right? I think there's a couple things to keep in mind, right? So in terms of short term, I think maybe 1 or 2 months, I expect to see significant, I want to say, effort, right? And significant impact of that particular effort. So that's definitely planned. And then you can actually get, I mean, I don't know if you will be able to, or if you will be willing to give you much more, but you can actually talk to Pyro, who is leading that, right? What I'd like to point out, though, is two things. First of all, our TVL is dependent on ELK, the ELK token, right? The reason for that is other projects, they actually reward, let's say, a governance token in exchange for locking liquidity, right? The difference with ELK is actually the liquidity that you're locking is paired, right, with that token, right? So in other words, if there is, let's say, as is now, I think like 7.5 million ELK in circulation, right? The maximum TVL for the entire ELK, let's say if ELK is worth $2, right, is actually 15 million times 2, because you've got the other, counterpart, right? But if the value of ELK becomes 10, then it's 150 million times 2, right? No, sorry. If the value of ELK becomes 10, then it's 75 million times 2, which is 150 million, right? If the value of ELK is 100, then the amount of TVL that we can expect is actually, 50 times, another times that, right? So like 1.5 billion, right? So in a way, structure can feel limiting, right? But the reason why structure is there is actually not to boost TVL. Although TVL is something that I will admit fully with you is something that we have struggled with a little bit, right? And my sense is it has to do with the fact that people are just chasing the highest, percentage, right? And then there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, it's just like, it's sort of like the reptilian part of your brain that sort of pushes you to look for that. It's fine, right? It's human nature. It's expected, right? But the more interesting part to me, and again, I just want to repeat that ELK is kind of a long-term play, right? The more interesting part to me is actually the APRs that we're able to generate on that locked liquidity, right? So we have maybe like 20 million or something like 25 million locked across all the chains that we support, right? And we are actually doing a volume, like at least a yearly volume, which is 5 to 10 times that, right? If you project to the year, right? What that means actually is that as a liquidity provider, even if there were no farms, right? Even if there were no opportunity to farm, you would actually earn, quite a nice return on your liquidity, right? And I feel like ultimately for a project like ours, the metric which is the most relevant, and I know there is Stargate, I know there's like you can argue different things, right? But essentially Stargate, I think most of the value is in stables, which are just locked in the in the contracts, right? I could be wrong, I haven't checked, but like I'm just saying, the most important metric is actually the number of transactions and the volume of transactions that we can do per day, all right, or per whatever period of time that you consider, because ultimately we're taking a fee out of each of these transactions, right? We will be. Our liquidity providers are earning from these transactions, and ultimately this creates a very positive cycle of investment, right? And like I've sort of I sort of tell the team, right, very often that it's like getting around this liquidity problem, like it's kind of a tough nut to crack, right? Because it's essentially a chicken and egg, because we need people to buy elk in order to provide liquidity in order to in order to farm, and then they receive elk, and then we sort of we're sort of limiting the APR based on the amount of elk which is available, and so like it just like it's basically a little bit of a chicken and egg issue, right? To gain much more liquidity, right? But once we crack that nut, right, and then I think the solution to that is going to be through more adoption, but it's also going to be through more projects which are actually using elk as infrastructure for their bridging and for their farming and for whatever else we plan to provide, right? As this happens, the TVL problem will actually just go away by itself, because the difference between our approach and let's say other approaches, are like your typical DEX approach, right, is that in their case, if the TVL doubles, right, the APR goes by 50%, right? In our case, if the TVL doubles, the APR doesn't go by 50%, because the elk token actually goes up in value, right? Since everything is paired with the elk token. And so this actually means that we have a lot more room to grow, right? Without essentially being limited by that. And we're also making it less likely for people to essentially, let's say, dump their elk tokens on the market as a result, right? But yeah, again, maybe just to wrap up, because I guess I'm talking a lot. I'm just trying to really give you like an overview of the thinking and then what we like, the way that we're approaching this problem. Just to wrap up, obviously, I would not recommend at this point, that 100% of your holdings in crypto is in elk, because that doesn't make sense, right? I mean, it doesn't make sense for any project, actually. But typically, the way you want to think about it is, some percentage is going to go to yield farming. Some of it is going to be for, super high risk and high reward type of farming. I think we have a trading community that can actually provide advice on, when is a good time to actually exit those before you get the dump, happening, and then your rewards will disappear, right? But you wanna, I think, if you wanna have some of your capital which is invested for something which is potentially slightly more longer term, right? As in, I would say that probably in a month we're probably not at $100 per elk, right? I mean, I would not expect that, but I would definitely expect, or I would hope that if nothing goes wrong within, let's say, a few months, we might be right. And it's totally your decision, right? How you want to invest and what fraction you want to invest, right? And yeah, like, I mean, I guess that went a little bit beyond the marketing question that you asked. I think I sort of answered a little bit that part, right? I think the proof, as they say, will be in the pudding, as we push forward with the marketing effort that we have planned, right? We've got some good momentum coming, I want to say, right? And it won't just be about marketing, but marketing will be a big part of that. And yeah, I guess for more details, I'm not sure what is the right way to do this, but one thing that we could do, if you're really interested in the marketing aspect, like specifically the marketing aspects, is that we could actually include as part of our weekly, or like, that doesn't have to be weekly, right? But like, as part of that, we could include a summary of like our current efforts and where we are actually placing our, where we're moving our pieces and where we're sort of placing our bets in terms of outreach to new users. Yeah, I mean, sorry, that was a really long question, but I hope that kind of really covers as much as possible of the yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And also throwing into, I think one of the difference between, I think people tend to, kind of blame marketing for, why isn't it growing at the rate we expected? And our marketing team does quite a bit, which is awesome. They're really great. And there's a lot of initiative, and there's constantly tweets and constant social media posts, and they put a lot of effort into that. And I think one of the things here that's different too is between a project like Stargate and us is the amount of VC funding they have to be able to pay for these press releases and put that money towards those things, as well as so I don't think it's necessarily all marketing either. It's some of that external investment which we have built from the ground up. So it's, just to kind of add that in there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Vote for Elk Labs. That way we can get funding. Sorry, go ahead. I interrupted you, Crypto Guy.
Yeah, so I had just a thought about, or a question about the mechanics of the migration. So basically, you can have a 3-day overlap where old farms and new farms are emitting at the same rate. So you can make a decision there. And if you're single staking elk, then that's straightforward, obviously. But I guess another dynamic is going to be like where the DEX is pointing, right? Like currently, if I'm providing liquidity to, say, the AVAX elk pair, anyone that's trading on the DEX on Avalanche is trading through that pair. So then at some point during the migration, do you switch? Like if I'm trading, the liquidity is pointing like to the new LP, and then what are the implications for your impermanent loss, basically?
So I think for impermanent loss, not significant, because again, I wouldn't expect the prices to diverge massively over the long term. What I think is likely to happen is the prices could diverge significantly, like over a short period of time, right? So not over like a long period of time, but over really a short period of time, right? So in terms of impermanent loss, obviously you are covered by the insurance up until the point that you withdraw, right? So if you withdraw, but then the problem, then the problem almost doesn't happen as long as you split your LP, because you'll have your elk and that'll be kind of it, right? I mean, nothing's going to happen to it. So you'll be covered up until the point that you withdraw, and you can withdraw even, I mean, I would recommend that you withdraw that you plan to withdraw at the latest, like on Monday or Tuesday, right? Because anyway, you won't be making any money out of it. So like it literally makes no sense to keep it, right? What I think you might have meant was not necessarily impermanent loss, but was potentially price impact, right? And so the price impact is going to be handled by the router itself. It's already handled as it is right now, right? What it means though is that basically this, you really want to see this as a transition period, right? Where essentially you go from 100% on old elk pairs to, ideally, it's not going to be 100, but like 99%, right? Or close to, right, on the new elk pair, right, over this period of time, right? Which actually means that at any point in time, you're anywhere between 0 and 100%, right, of the total liquidity, right? So it means if your plan is to trade elk in large amounts over this weekend, it's probably not a good idea, right? or at least you have to know what you're doing. So you have to really look at the price impact to make sure, because you can actually get a very good deal depending on when you're doing the operation, right? But if you're just saying, I want to buy a lot of elk, and I don't care really about the fact that this is getting upgraded and all of that. Like I just, I have I have 100K and I just want to buy elk today, right? When is the right time to buy? Then probably the answer is, if you don't know what you're doing and you're not looking at the price impact properly and all of that, I would say not this weekend, because there is a risk that you're going to suffer from more price impact than you want to, right? So I would say either buy it now or wait until like Tuesday and buy it then, but in between, for small amounts, or like for upgrading, or for, getting out of a farm, getting into the other farm, given that we cover impermanent loss, I would not be too concerned, right, about that. Because again, since they're exchangeable one for one, like there's no reason, like for them to diverge in the long term, right? And we can actually we have the ability to enforce, this peg, right? As in that one elk of the old version is actually one elk of the new version, right? So, there's gonna be some opportunities for people that really want to just leverage this period of time to make a little bit of money, or like scalp a little bit here and there, right? But if that's not your goal, then I would just say watch out for the price impact when you're trading over the weekend, and I wouldn't expect anything bad to happen other than that, really. So yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I guess I was thinking about it a little, because I was thinking that, basically at some point there are going to be two liquidity pools for elk AVAX. There's going to be elk V1 AVAX,
Yeah, that's
and
correct. Yeah.
okay. And so it's not like you shut elk V1 AVAX, I shut the emissions off, but the router is still going to be routing through there, and then so the price of
Yes.
AVAX
So,
should be what it is, and then so that the question is elk V1 versus 2 peg, but that should,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, so
arbitraging
you
should
want to
remain.
think about it this way. You want to think about it this way, really, is that you're gonna have a migration. So like initially it'll be 100% of the old one, 0 of the new one, right? And then over time it's gonna get closer to like 50%, right? So as long as the old one is more than 50% of the pair with the with AVAX, for example, right? And this happens by pair, by the way. So like it's more complicated than that, right? But essentially, once it's so as long as it's over 50%, it will actually route through the elk token, to the old elk token, right? And then once it's above, it will actually route through the new one, right? So I mean that's an oversimplification of what's gonna happen, really, right? But essentially, this is the process, right? So again, your biggest risk really is there's 20% of the new elk in the pool that's sort of been converted. It's in the pool, it's in the farm, right? And at that point, you say, well, market buy with 1,000 AVAX elk, right? And there you might get screwed, actually, because you've got 20% only, right? So the price impact will be much higher, right? Whereas the right thing to do might have been market buy 100% of the old elk and then upgrade that elk to the new elk. You would end up with more elk in this case, right? So like essentially the mechanics can be complicated if you're trying to game the system. But if all you're doing is just you've got your old elk, you say, okay, at this point I will upgrade, I'll get the new elk, I'll wait until the farm shows up. Then once the farm is there, I'll actually create the pair. I'll put my elk in the in the farm, my ELK LP in the farm, the risk for you is, very low, considering that we provide impermanent loss protection. Does that make sense?
I think that makes sense. Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. I think we might kind of wrap it up there. Got to get back to work on the upgrade process, and I want to thank everyone for popping in.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Snakes. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah, sure. I mean, feel free to ask more questions. Like, we'll sort of get to this over, on the chat, like over the weekend. No worries. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of a bit of a crazy thing happening this weekend, but hopefully, once we're on the other side, it's all blue sky and lots of great things happening. So yeah.
Coming out, everyone. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Snake.
Thanks, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.